So good morning everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you. Obviously so far we've had really great interesting insights of what we need to do in the future from Ed and some really deep considerations about what we actually need to do now, especially around reporting from Greg. So from my perspective, come here today to do something a little bit different, and my talk today is going to be a little bit about finding meaning in a social world. Obviously things have changed significantly over the past 40 years, and I'm just going to share a little bit about my journey, some of the things I've learned along the way, and how they, I suppose, comically tie into digital marketing, because I'm a bit of a misfit, I am an outsider, I am not within the industry, I've never held a position within digital marketing. However, it's always been something that's piqued my interest, and you'll see from my journey how some of those aspects tie in, and ultimately, it's a pleasure to actually be with you today. I think from my perspective, a lot of things are interesting in what's developing, and I'm always trying to keep trends ahead of myself. You'll understand a little bit more about that when you kind of are able to see my journey in person. So, a little bit about what I currently do. I am someone who is really good at taking cutting-edge psychology and bringing it down to public level, being able to deliver it into workplaces. We do a lot around wellbeing and inclusion. I run an agency. We've got a variety of clients across different fields, and actually a few digital marketing agencies have our wellbeing strategies and inclusion strategies designed by ourselves. That's led me into a place over the past few years where I've become a little bit of a spokesperson. I've been on TV, really distilling some aspects, but also had a few arguments with politicians, which I tell you is great fun because you can make them squirm in a whole other way. But that has led me to be able to, take stages and be able to share some of my own insights. But the reality is, especially in digital marketing, no one really cares what you're doing now. Everyone wants to know what you're going to do for me in the future, how you're going to grow things, how you're going to make things happen. So let me actually give you a little bit of a moment to reflect on where I've actually come from and why I do what I do today. Because a lot of people ask that. I've not always been a business psychologist working with a range of companies. I've had a hell of a journey, and I'm going to share some of that with you now to give you a bit of an idea and really kind of help you to think about why you do what you do, some of the lessons I've learned from my own journey, and how we can, I suppose, embrace them within digital marketing as well, because it's probably more relevant than you think. So for me, I was born and brought up in sunny Bolton, which is, about 150 miles from here. But let me be honest, it's not sunny at all. It's one of the biggest towns in Europe. It's also one of the wettest. It's always raining. And for me, I was a surprise. My parents were teenagers when they had me. I grew up on a council estate, and it literally was so much of a surprise that my parents really didn't know what I was going to become. They were, I suppose in so many ways, not prepared. And if you ask me, I suppose, how much of a surprise I was, probably very similar to finding out your client has bought some links on Fiverr because it said they were safe in the title. Now, ultimately, for me, that meant that as a data point, I wasn't really going to go anywhere. I was probably not going to make it, but what my parents did have was a work ethic. Now, my dad made parts for fire engines, my mum was a nanny, a nursery nurse, and looked after children. And for me growing up, I saw them grafting for a better future for me and my brothers. That really kind of made me think that, firstly, I know I'm going to need to work hard to achieve things because my parents are setting that example, but also it made me think, I don't want to be like my mum working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads, or my dad working 12-hour shifts just to keep some food on the table. And that kind of ignited my curiosity to what I could become. And when I was 7, that picture that right there up on that screen. Now, most people in this room will have a crazy uncle who's a bit different, a bit nonconformist, a bit of a renegade, and he's always looking to do something different. That was me. My crazy uncle bought me a Commodore 64 and said, Lee, use that, it's the future. And you know what? He weren't far off, because suddenly, from such a young age, I had some digital literacy and an ability to use technology and machines. And my parents had no idea what this box was with some keys on it. Mum said it looked like a typewriter, but ultimately that ability to start playing with those machines. And, I graduated through a range of different technologies. But for me, I was quite academic, and that was identified quite early. People put some faith in me to be able to achieve something. I had a few teachers who kept me out of trouble because I was that curious kid who was always asking why, always pushing it a bit too far, not really having boundaries with adults that you should do when I was a kid. And if I'm brutally honest, it took me to, I suppose, an interesting place. And the lesson I actually learned from that childhood was that effort counts twice. And I think this is so important in when we reflect on what we do today. Especially from a digital marketing perspective, there is so many different skills to learn. There's expectations of being a really good generalist, but being a specialist at the same time. And when we think about what we actually do on a day-to-day basis, we use effort to build those skills. But then, on top of those skills, if we then apply additional effort, that becomes achievement. That's how we then excel at what we do. That's how we then are able to outperform what's expected. And so often in life, when we believe or feel that we have a talent for something, we don't use that effort for a second time. And it doesn't allow us to get as close to our potential or the outcomes and outputs that we can potentially achieve. So that was something that I kind of learned quite young, is that I was going to have to push on that second time. And because digital marketing is evolving so quickly, while the fundamentals generally stay the same, everything is continually changing. You know, algorithms change 300 times a year. That means there's a lot of effort to just be able to keep up with the pace and keep that agility. So that's the first lesson that I kind of took. And that actually managed to take me to be able to do something that was quite interesting. Because I was the first one in my extended family to go to university, which was a privilege. It's also a lot of pressure. No one else had been. No one else knew what it was like. Nobody else was actually able to give me advice. So off I went to the big city. I went to Manchester. I was living it up. Joined every society that I could. Made loads of friends. And first year, like you do, you kind of course through, make it happen. Second year, things get hard. If I'm brutally honest, I started to struggle. I was actually stood on a stage in front of 300 students doing a presentation. I choked and froze halfway through. And for me, who's always found having a voice is important, that really knocked my confidence. But what actually happened beyond that is my mental health started to fail. Got so bad that after a few months, I started to avoid everything. The job that I was having to do to be able to fund my studies, my friends, socials, university, exams, to a point where I locked myself in my dorm for 2 weeks, and security came, brought the door down, took me home. And that was a difficult time, if I'm honest. I was young, I was going through a really difficult time, and all of a sudden, this dream of the future, because for me, university, I was told, you know, go and get a good job after university, you'll be able to set an example for your cousins, your brothers, you'll be able to support the family. And feeling like I failed was difficult. But what I actually did is took a year at home. I had to build myself back up. It was challenging, but it taught me the second lesson. You have to learn from failure. I had to be honest and look that it wasn't me who failed, but I'd not applied myself well. And my mental health was something that was going to fluctuate for the rest of my life, but I needed to manage that and take some ownership over it. And being able to actually do that allowed me to get back and graduate, which was validation that you can go through a really difficult time and still come out of the other end. Obviously, from a digital marketer's perspective, you're always learning from experiments. You're always testing things. Sometimes things don't work. Sometimes things don't get the outcomes that you're expecting. Sometimes being able to communicate that to clients who think it should work overnight and everything should be as it is, you know, it's a challenge. But when we start to look at what learnings can we take from that, what shouldn't we do again, what can we learn, how can we express what we've learned, and how can we help sometimes our clients to understand that we are experimenting. There is no one set standard way of doing things, and because things are continually changing, if I get my lab coat on, like I'm at school, you know, burning some chemicals, that's effectively what I'm doing on an everyday basis, even though you don't see that. You just see the campaign at the end, or the report, and, you know, pick through it and pick fault. So, for me, being able to learn from failure is another lesson that I, you know, really have had to come to terms with, but it's been able to help me to shape some of the work that I do today. And then the next step, so after getting back to uni and graduating, I managed to get onto a graduate scheme. Now that was it, Lee, you know, you've got a career now. Oh wow, excellent. So off I went doing financial risk at the Co-op Bank. I'd love to say financial risk was the thing that I wanted to do, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew is that I wanted to be able to actually earn some money and try and start to build a life of my own. Now, financial risk, as I'm sure you're aware, is quite analytical focused, and on that grad scheme, I graduated in 2007, so I can pretty sure you imagine 6 months later when all of a sudden lots of the seniors started to pack their desks up and get kicked out. And, you know, they had the mortgages, they had the flashy cars, they were going on big holidays, they were telling me about the 60 grand bonus they'd had the year before. And I was there thinking, I've made it. And then watching them pack their desks up, I thought, oh crap, maybe not. Ultimately, that was me then a few months later, where I was made redundant from my graduate scheme. Really, at the start of my career, you were told, sorry, not today. External circumstances and all that, you'll have to go and do something else. And you know what? That was like a kick in the teeth right then. I had to move back to my parents' house, who'd moved house and downsized because they didn't think I was coming back. So it was a challenging time, and I was left with the boiler room, which fit a single mattress in. It was so small, you couldn't get a single bed frame in it. And that was my life. But what that made me realise is that I have to think flexibly. You know what? It might have felt pretty bad at the time, but I wasn't my colleagues who'd had 20-year careers. They had all these qualifications, they had a wife and children, they had a mortgage, they had things on finance. I didn't have any of that. I was just at the start. And you know what? I can be flexible and I can change. And no doubt within your own careers, there's an awful lot of flexibility and being adaptable in digital marketing, because let's be honest, there are so many different skills involved, there are so many expectations placed, and because things are continually evolving, that flexibility is what actually helps you to be able to navigate the future, and be able to see the opportunities and possibilities before they arrive, which allow you to then exploit those and really make a difference to both your clients and to the things that you build yourselves. And on building yourselves, what did I do when I ended up in that boiler room? I ended up building a video game business, and it really started with me thinking, right, how can I do something? How can I exploit some opportunities? That is literally probably week 3 of the business where I thought, you know what? I can simply start e-commerce in video games. Now, I spoke about this previously, but I was in the right place at the right time. It took off in a big way. And for me, you know, it actually took over my parents' house. I managed to hire my brothers and my mum as de facto employees, and I pretty much had a production line from that small boiler room all the way down to the living room. The funny bit of that was that after 18 months, I was actually able to move out into a unit and to afford my first house. Now, that was incredibly lucky. Looking back, I was in the right place at the right time. I also had to buy my parents a new driveway because the amount of incoming and outgoing deliveries, I'd absolutely destroyed it. And ultimately, I then gifted them, for all their patience and lots of their pro bono work, with a new driveway. And yeah, let's just say that for me, I was in that situation where I was having to think, right, what can I do? How can I start to find something that will allow me to be able to do something different and excel? And building a business, I'll tell you what, made a lot of mistakes. I, at times isolated myself. I at times worked more than I should have. And on reflection, it was a journey that I actually managed to learn a lot from. But also, sometimes I was not as aware of the learnings because I was so busy doing. And the reality is that the lesson I took from that really was being proactive. I didn't know anything about e-commerce and supply and fulfillment and logistics at the time. So I self-taught myself. I went out there and made an effort to learn how to do it, how to be able to build a business from scratch. And you know what? I went to secure funding. No chance. Young black lad, big idea, bit of an attitude. I had to bootstrap it myself by working 9 to 5 at a local government, which, you know the type of person that I am. It wasn't really the most fun environment for me to be working in. I was loud, and I definitely wasn't happy with being told, oh, that's how it's been for 40 years. Wasn't going to listen to that. I was always looking to change and evolve things. But that proactivity then allowed me to actually take some other opportunities. I went working for a career charity, and that, really taught me a lot of lessons about how people in society struggle and how other people have many different challenges. And what I'd also done in that period is be proactive and start learning some of the qualifications that I used in my business today around health, well-being, and performance. And I actually then decided to take another opportunity alongside the business to show that I wasn't just a one-trick pony, but I could turn my hand to lots of things. like many digital marketers do on a daily basis. And that was going working in elite sport. Now, for the few of you that might follow football, you'll know that these two clubs have had rather contrasting seasons this year. But I went into both these clubs working with the academy and the elite development squads, using both those qualifications and some of the data and analytic insights that I'd learned from building my first company's algorithm and being able to look at risk profiling when it comes to e-commerce. So I decided I won't put myself out there. I got a chance at Oldham Football Club, which is relatively small. What I was doing there was quickly picked up by 2 Premiership teams, and I ended up spending some time working in those environments that, for me, weren't actually the best environments personally, because the values there, it's very cutthroat. The cutting-edge science I loved, the way people were treated, I didn't. But ultimately, it did allow me to experience a range of different aspects and really kind of taught me what I can potentially bring, but also how opportunities can open up. Because the lesson that I learned from taking that move was that you can get down with data. Everywhere needs those skills, those abilities to analyse, to pull insights. And I even speak to people today and say, you know what, can you use Tableau? It's just having them think. It's relevant to so many different positions, so many different jobs. It's not something that is often talked about. I've got 2 young kids, don't know what they really do in terms of data literacy at school, so I'm like trying to get them all fair with it as a language, thinking about the different things that they're going to be able to do. But being able to do that allowed me an opportunity to go and work in a field completely different than I had done before. And it's about thinking that those skills that you have, you might love digital marketing, you probably do, but those skills that you build today, as digital marketing evolves, those skills will serve you well, not just in digital marketing, but in any other ventures that you may take on the side and on your career journey, which is usually, as I've already alluded to, a bit more of a squiggle than a straight line. But thinking about that, you know, he's working at a football club, he's got this business. How the hell did he end up working in wellbeing and stood on a stage in Leicester? Well, the turning point for me, and this was something that happened in 2014, was that my immune system failed. And overnight, I went from being fully mobile, fully independent, to not being able to walk, to feed myself, to wash myself. And the only way I can really describe it, and I've had a bit of a laugh with a friend who works in digital marketing, but really it's the equivalent of waking up one morning and having iOS 14 installed, and all those things that you knew, you're not being able to use in the same way anymore. And it was incredibly painful. It was very difficult. My son was 18 months old at the time. He couldn't understand why I couldn't get out of bed and play. My wife was 6 months pregnant with my daughter. And at a time when I was supposed to be there for my family and there to support other people, I couldn't support myself. And naturally, in that position, doesn't matter that I'd been through redundancy and mental health challenges, I was still in that hospital bed like, why me? Why now? Never been ill before, never been in hospital, and all of a sudden, I've lost things that I considered really simple things, an ability to be independent, an ability to be physical. And I spent a month in hospital being tested, gradually starting to process what had happened. And then, after a month, I got discharged into walking rehab, where I gradually started the process of learning to walk again. And a few months into that journey, my daughter was born. And as I held my daughter for the first time, I realised I had to get back up on my feet to be able to play with my children. I had to be able to show them what was possible. But more than anything, I was going to get back on my feet so I could take my daughter's first steps with her. And that is what kind of sat into my mind and give me, in so many ways, the ability to, after 11 months, be able to walk a mile unaided. But during that journey, my daughter's pram was my walking aid. I had a lot of setbacks. I had issues with my vertebrae in my back. I had some issues with one of my knees. But I managed to take those first steps. A lot of those steps were taken looking at lampposts and grids on the floor to see, could I get a few more steps? And what did that teach me, that experience? Well, firstly, I had a lot of time to reflect on what I wanted to achieve, what I wanted to do, and the difference that I wanted to make to the world. I was shipping video games around Europe. That was great. It gave me the financial freedom to train across a variety of areas. It meant that I wasn't on SSP or sick pay. I was able to keep things going and recover. I was incredibly grateful for that. But moving games around the world isn't making a difference to people's lives. I started to think, what lesson can I learn from this experience? Well, the first lesson was being consistent, because I had to do my physio every morning. It didn't matter how I felt. I'd get out of bed some mornings. I was stiff. I was sore. I didn't want to do it. And you know what? I could have easily not took that opportunity. But consistency and ability to keep doing the basics well, it's important in life. It was massively important in me getting back on my feet, especially when I had the setbacks, to keep consistently going. But it's massive in your everyday lives, in digital marketing. And sometimes clients don't realise how important consistency is. They just want a campaign to go viral and woo, yeah, look at all this, look at all these conversions that we've got. And they're expecting that they're going to be able to do that without a strategy as well. Because, you know, Jessie's 22, she uses social media all the time. She follows these influencers. She can do it. Or you just get things optimized and they're like, oh, okay, we don't want to work with you anymore because you've made it work. And there's a lot of stories that I hear and a lot of companies who just don't really see the value. And even within some companies that I work with as well, where they see marketing as, oh, they do the nice graphics, don't they? They never see the analytics. They never see the work behind the events. The Annika team themselves, the work they put into this event for you to be sat here, it's easy to overlook that sometimes. But ultimately, consistency, especially on the basics, but then doing what you can do well, is a massively important ability to foster, because it's not about the immediate performance, it's so often about how we can build that over time. So for me, in that period, after getting back on my feet, I had to take a moment to think, what am I going to do next? Because I've decided I want to do something different. And that time was spent with my kids. I spent a lot of time with my kids and running my business in the gaps. The bond I've got with my kids is amazing, but my kids taught me an awful lot about life, how to stay curious, how to play, how to keep learning, and actually made me think about how lucky and valued that I actually was. And in that time, I started to realise I want to do something that makes an impact. I want to use these skills from the different sectors that I've worked in. I want to be able to actually go and support businesses to make sure people are looked after, to make sure people are included. And during that reflection time, the biggest lesson that I learned was I have a purpose. I have a reason why I want to do something different. And that purpose is empowering and enabling other people to do great things. Everyone in this room, when you think about your work in digital marketing, you are empowering your clients to be able to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Sometimes it's easy to not see the value in what you do on an everyday basis. And when your clients are making unrealistic demands and they're chasing you for deadlines and they're complaining that they don't know what's going on, it's easy to actually feel, why do I do this? What's the greater point behind it? But so often, when we take a step back and think about what we've done, what we've achieved, the pathway that we're on, we start to see some of the underlying threads from things that we enjoy, things that we don't, and why. And being able to do that gives us an opportunity to start to consider what's purposeful and meaningful to us. How do we bring that to the world? And how do we actually be able to help other people through the work that we do, through the skills that we have, and being able to utilise that on an everyday basis. So that kind of takes me back to where we are today. And the business that I run is 2 years old. We work with a range of clients to help them build wellbeing strategies and do bespoke training and delivery. And it still takes me to a place where, we've been recognised with awards. We've had, a really interesting 2 years, despite the difficulties of COVID, meaning that a lot of the budgets that we would normally work on have been funneled towards COVID security and support. But from my perspective, those lessons that I've learned, those difficult times, those times I fell into the trenches and had to climb back out again, those times I had to think differently, those times I grasped at opportunities, are all things that you're already doing on a daily basis. Sometimes you just don't spend enough time to reflect on them. And for me, it's been a real journey to be able to get to a place where I've started to see that in myself and see how I can bring that to other people. And part of that is actually stood on this stage today, sharing a story, something a little bit different outside of the wellbeing and psychology type of talks that I so often do. Because you know what? Sometimes they're absolutely great for a certain audience, but they can be a little bit dry. And what I wanted to do today is bring a bit of story, bring a bit of journey, and just get you thinking about what you can achieve, what you already have achieved, and you know the times that you've been through, the resilience that you have, that you've already fostered and cultivated in yourself. So just to finally think about some of these are the lessons that I've learned from my journey. And absolutely no doubt some of those will resonate with you when you take a moment later to think about what you've been through and what you've achieved. Because especially for me, running a business, I have to use those on a daily basis. For me, it's so important that we really think about what we can bring to the table, what we can do for our clients, how we move from features and what we actually do to the benefits and impact that we bring, and how we communicate that in a world where talent is increasingly sought after, and there's a hell of a lot of talent sat in front of me today in this room. So I want to thank you for listening to my story. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And as the imposter and the outsider from digital marketing, today I feel like I'm one of you. So thank you everyone for your ears, your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.